Brandon, maybe what I'll do first is add from a bird's eye view. What is the concept of the fourth turning? Where does this come from, and what does it mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, here's the book. Neil Howe is the author. This is a revised edition. It came out a year or two ago. The original book was written in 1997. And for the Bitcoiners among us, that was the same year as The Sovereign Individual. I consider both of these foundational texts to understand the context in which humanity is going through right now. And the book was written by a historian and a demographer. And they wrote previous books. Their big one before that was called Generations. And they're just essentially studying American history, finding patterns. What can we learn about looking backwards? And the fourth turning was essentially their a little bit more narrow focused book, focused on these 80 to 90 year cycles that they, for some reason, discovered in their research. And to be clear, this doesn't predict the future. A common critique would be like horoscopes for intellectuals. And I would say if you just glance at the material, you see a chart or whatever, it can definitely feel that way. And I was skeptical at first, but the deeper I went into the material, I think the thesis that they have, which I'll present in a second, is actually fundamental to human civilization. It feels like there's cycles everywhere you look. We're governed by them. But modern man believes in this like linear path of history. We went from a primitive man, then we discovered agriculture, and then we had laws and religion, and here we go. And I think reality is much more complicated than that. I don't want to get into ancient history, but I think cycles are everywhere. I don't think our history is as linear as we were told. So getting into the thesis, what is this thing? And so the punchline, the fourth turning, is the end of the 80 to 90 year cycle. And so what that cycle feels like is our institutions are starting to crumble and society is starting to get more volatile. Populism increases. Essentially, we look around and nothing's working. And the instinct as a society is to collectivize and to work together to solve the big problem in front of us. Okay. Historically, they've been war. All fourth turnings have ended in war, total war. And all total wars have been in a fourth turning. And that's going back 400 or 500 years. Now, and we're in a fourth turning now, and I'll explain more. Does that mean we for sure are going into a total war in the next 5 years? The answer is no, it's not a for sure. It's not predictive. But we do need a catalyst large enough to sufficiently mobilize the population to essentially like march in the same direction.
You opted out of the broken financial system by adopting Bitcoin and taking self-custody of your money. But protecting your wealth is only part of the equation. Now it's time to protect your freedom. My family is stacking sats and stacking flags. A second passport is our hedge against government overreach and uncertainty. If you're a Bitcoiner looking for your exit strategy, our friends at Citizen X will help you secure second citizenship through investment or descent. Book your free call today by hitting the link in the show notes or simply scanning the QR code on the screen. Let me break this down for my fellow Bitcoiners. In just 8 weeks, I've seen a serious shift. More strength, more energy, and fast muscle gains. The reason? FITSCRIPT. They ran 124 biomarkers, blood, hormones, inflammation, and built a fully custom plan, nutrition, training, supplements. No guesswork, no templates. This is functional medicine meets precision fitness for high-performing men who want sovereignty over their health. If you care about optimization the way you care about your money, test, don't guess. Don't trust, verify. Hit the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen to check out FITSCRIPT and see what's possible.
If we go back to the previous fourth turning, that was the period between 1929 and 1945. So you have the Great Depression, stock market collapse, obviously World War II on the back of that. And not only was that a crazy time in America, but we essentially created all these new institutions and policies to respond to the chaos around us. So that's when Social Security came into play. That's when, let's see, deficit spending, World Bank, NATO, IMF, all these FDIC insurance, all these programs. Oh, the banks collapse, so let's make a new insurance. So if the banks have a bank run, you're all fine. Oh, a bunch of people lost their job, can't support themselves. Okay, let's make Social Security, right? So all those things came out in a response to the chaos. And on the back of World War II, that enters the second turning, which is of the 4 quadrants. That's a relative peacetime. And that stage is marked by exhaustion from the conflict. We're so sick of the chaos. We just want a white picket fence, raise a family, go to work, watch TV, whatever. It's also a period of sterility and boring. Like, think Leave It to Beaver, if you guys remember that show. And what happens then? What you'll notice in the pattern here is it's very reactionary. So we went from chaos in the 4th turning, then we went to stability and general economic equality. That's the highest economic equality in the 1st turning after the shakeup. And the kids who are born during that period of stability, they come of age, they look around, they go, what the hell? Mom and dad are boring, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And they kind of push back on their upbringing, right? And that's where you get the civil rights movement, the psychedelic 60s, Vietnam, all that kind of stuff. And
punk rock of the early 70s too.
Exactly, all the same stuff. And that's the midway point of the cycle. And what's important to highlight there is the midway point is when all the religious revolutions occur. Going back to like the Quakers and the Calvinists, and I don't even remember all those, but oddly enough, that's when that happens. Then you go to the 3rd turning. So after that cultural revolution period, the 3rd turning is a period of deregulation. And it's like, hey, the economics are solid. Let's start deregulating. Crime goes up. Essentially, economic tailwinds propel a society forward, but we start pulling apart the parts of society that actually hold us together. So we essentially create a house of cards. Okay. Then the 4th turning comes, which would be 2008. It started. Nice parallel with 1929, and a lot of change since then. And so in 2008, all of a sudden we pull out one of those cards at the bottom of the castle and the whole thing starts to come undone. And so that's where we are now. It probably felt like different stages from 08 to now. I would call this like a general upward ramp in chaos, unpredictability, and I think leading towards crescendo. And I think if you ask people today, they feel like something's off and they're not exactly sure why. You can't trust what you read. You can't trust the government. You can't trust the news. You can't trust the schools. You can't trust healthcare. All the things that hold society together aren't being trusted by the populace, and for good reason. So if you pull up a Gallup poll or any of the major polls, they'll go back, I think, like 80 plus years on how much do you trust your institutions? And it's at a historic low right now. It has, since they've been collecting data, it's never been lower. That's another hallmark of the 4th turning. And I think skipping to actually, let me give you a little bit of the why. How is this even possible? Okay. So the authors identified 4 archetypes: hero, prophet, nomad, artist. And they come out in those. There it is. Nice. That's my graphic. Beauty.
We figured it was.
They come out in a very particular order. So, for example, a prophet raises an artist raises a hero raises a nomad, something like that. And so the reason why it comes in a consistent pattern is going back to that Leave It to Beaver example, right? The kids rebel against the boring parents. That is a natural instinct that humans have. I think it's a good thing, by the way. It makes us more adaptable to change. If parents push back on their parents, what if society changes and parents are more adapted to the future, or the kids are more adapted to the future, right? It essentially spreads out our bets from a biology standpoint. Anyways, so people predictably push back and it creates these different archetypes. They go back 500 years or so. And what the 4th turning allows us to use, like why is this useful to us, is because the constellation of those archetypes dictates the mood. Okay. Is the prophet archetype in middle age and running everything while the hero's a child? Or is the artist in charge and the nomads this, right? So 4 stages of life. You're a kid, then you're an early adult, then you're in charge, and then you're giving wisdom at the end of life. And so that constellation dictates the mood. Right now, the boomers are the prophet archetype. and they're the ones in charge, more or less. And so the boomers are idealistic, do as I say, not as I do. And I'll skip to millennials because I know we're all millennials and probably most of the listeners. Millennials are the hero archetype, which sounds pretty badass. But what that actually means is during the total war, we're the cannon fodder. We're the primary soldiers going out there. And the artists, which are the Gen Zs, they're born and they're essentially raised during the chaos period. So they become inward, they become artistic, they become antisocial, really creative. They're kind of taught from a young age that the world is scary. You can't trust anything. So they more or less turn inward. Whereas millennials are more social, team oriented, et cetera, because that's the context in which we grew up. And one more on millennials versus the nomads to round it out. The nomads are the Gen Xers. They're the bad boys. They're the latchkey kids. They're the libertarians. Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, those would be good examples. They were raised in a period post-hippie era and that's when they created the term yuppie. So think post-hippies finally had kids and from the boomers, the prophets, and they didn't want to really parent. They're all individual. They want to do their own thing. So they didn't really raise the kids. And so that's why those nomads grew up under-parented. And that creates like the movie Terminator or the Goonies, stuff like that. That's media of that era. And then in the 90s, 80s and 90s, when the millennials were starting being born, there was some sentiment that said, hey, the kids are effed. Why are the kids so crazy? We need to do something about this. And so then we had the millennials being born, and they were seventh place ribbons, baby on board stickers, mothers against drunk driving, right? Then we all of a sudden over-parented the millennials. So we all turned out like entitled snowflake brats. And then when we got in the workplace, the prophets and the nomads, boomers and Xers, they couldn't stand us because we were oil and water with their general ethos. And one more point here as I'm piling on the underpinnings here, and then we can debate or discuss this. Why does a cohort of people born in a certain era lead to an archetype? Like, oh, I'm an individual. I'm not a hero. I'm not whatever. So here's how it works. We're all born in the exact same context. 20-year period, roughly millennials. So we're born, the conditions in which we're born are relatively similar. Our influences are relatively similar. So before we leave our parents' nest, the external world is relatively the same. Okay, then we go out and we leave the nest, and what do? We go hang out with our peers. We go to college or university or whatever it is. And as soon as we leave the nest, we forge that identity with our peers, and we essentially stamp all of our like subconscious processing, our bias, the way we approach the world is forged at that early age. And then we more or less maintain that perspective throughout our life. Obviously, stage of life influences us as individuals, but a nomad versus a hero, or a Gen X versus millennial at any stage of life, like, yeah, they'll change individually, but they're still very, very different. And so that leads us to the whole point of this thesis, which is that history creates the generation. So the context forges the generation. Then the generation goes out and enforces its will on history. So it's a symbiotic relationship: history, generations, history. And that cycle, that process is what keeps this thing flowing and flowing and flowing. And
would this be I think this is your other image that I'm going to pull up here, but it's basically saying that, we say we're in a fourth turning right now. And what I'm hearing here and what I've heard you discuss before is it's not necessarily that more bad things happen at certain periods of time. It's that generations react differently to their environments based on their upbringing and their interactions with the world, which translates into, if I'm not mistaken, this. Would that be correct?
Exactly right.
Do you want to outline this?
Yeah, so I don't know the genesis of this meme. I made the image, and I like the Aurora Borealis. I think that's what it's called, the snake eating tail in the middle. But I think this is the fastest way to understand the generational theory from Neil Howe. You can just see, okay, hard times create strong men. We're in the hard times period. The world's chaos. We need people to step up. We need to rebuild the world. We essentially wipe the slate clean and rebuild all our institutions. And after you do that, you create strong men. And what do the strong men do in the first turning? They create good times. So we have a strong culture, strong institutions that creates a flourishing society. But okay, if you're born into this amazing life, you're the third generation of a billionaire, all you know is luxury and you don't have to work, you're insulated from the world. And that good time creates weak men. You can look at all the celebrities, the celebrity kids, etc. Okay, weak men, what do weak men do? They create hard times. They are not making hard decisions. They're not being strong leaders. They're not, raising families and building businesses and building. So the weak men create the hard times, and then we come back to hard times, and that demands strong men.
Hey, you. Yes, you watching the Bitcoin price movements and the latest exciting news. It's awesome to stay informed, but the real power of Bitcoin comes from taking control. Don't just watch, take action. Head over to btcsessions.ca/learn for free step-by-step tutorials that guide you through every major skill you need to know, plus full video playlists for deeper dives on any topic you like. And if you're ready for the ultimate fast track, scroll to the bottom and check out bitcoinmentor.io for premium one-on-one experience with my team of Bitcoin experts to ensure you get it right the first time. Don't wait. Secure your Bitcoin future today. Hit the link in the show notes or scan the QR code on the screen.